Welcome back to the deep dive. We are diving into a pretty dense stack of source material today, and our mission is, well, it's ultra specific.
It is.
We've been given a collection of interviews with Noam Chomsky, mostly published in Truth Out between 2013 and 2016. They were compiled into a volume called Optimism Despite Despair.
And just to be very clear, we are not here to summarize the political content of the book.
Absolutely not. No, our job is pure systems analysis. So we're treating this book not as political doctrine, but like an artifact produced by and reacting to the information ecosystem.
Right, and to do that, we're deploying what we call a deep press analysis framework.
Which comes with a strict anti-propaganda mandate.
That's right. We're looking at the incentives behind it, the institutions it critiques, the power dynamics, and most importantly, the clear, structured signals we can pull from it about how the system operates.
Regardless of whether you agree with the author's conclusions or not.
Exactly. We're interested in the mechanics of power and information that are laid out in the text.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack the context first, because the timing of these interviews it's just crucial. They span from 2013 to 2016. So globally, you're dealing with the refugee crisis, the rise of ISIS, expanding drone warfare.
And at home, the political upheaval leading right into that very polarized 2016 U.S. election.
Yeah. It's a time of immense, tangible anxiety for any audience.
And that context immediately signals the book's market position. You see, the publisher wasn't just putting out another volume of commentary. They were deploying maximum cultural capital.
You can see that so clearly in the framing. I mean, the promotional stuff leans heavily on his global status. They're quoting the New York Times, calling him the most significant intellectual alive today.
And there's another one from Ha-Joon Chang, The Economist, calling him the most humane, philosophically refined, and erudite public intellectual.
So that framing, it seems designed to do two things at once.
I think so. First, it establishes immediate, almost non-negotiable intellectual authority. But second, the title itself, Optimism Despite Despair. That's a masterstroke of media positioning.
How so?
Well, it explicitly acknowledges the audience's emotional state. The fear, the uncertainty, and then it suggests that the intellectual rigor inside is the antidote.
So it positions the critique not just as information, but as essential guidance for navigating what feels like societal collapse.
Exactly. It converts that fear into a market driver for what is, let's be honest, a very dense political critique.
Okay, so the environment demands high-stakes analysis, and the author's status gives it the authority to reach a mainstream audience. Let's move to incentive.
Right. Let's separate them. What did the author himself say he was trying to do?
Well, Chomsky stated his aim was explicitly not persuasion. He said his goal was to outline a position, which then allows the reader to, and this is his phrase, use their own intellectual resources.
So it's an appeal for intellectual autonomy, fostering critical thinking.
Yes, and he links that directly to political action. He frames it as contributing to the goal of building a popular force to solve these huge systemic problems.
Like the Sanders campaign, he mentions that.
He does, yeah. He points to the momentum around the Sanders campaign as the kind of grassroots energy he hoped his analysis would nourish. So his incentive is ideological, structural change.
That's the author's incentive. But the market dynamics are, well, they're quite different, though completely predictable.
Which are?
The publishing strategy is all about capturing global attention by monetizing instability.
So the publisher's incentive is to sell the antidote to all that global volatility: Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, climate change.
Yes, all of it. Packaged neatly under the banner of a globally recognized authority. It's a calculated deployment of intellectual capital to capture market share among people who are looking for answers in anxious times.
It's a fascinating split, isn't it? The author wants to build agency, and the market wants to monetize the anxiety that makes people seek that agency.
Which brings us to the institutions. If those are the incentives, who or what are the targets of the analysis? Where does the source material say the problems are?
The primary focus seems to be on how power structures systematically evade accountability, how they bypass the rules.
The critique of U.S. governance is a good place to start. It's very direct.
Extremely. Chomsky repeatedly analyzes the political parties as, effectively, business parties. He says they consistently locate themselves to the right of the population on so many key issues.
Even when they know what the polls say.
Right. Which suggests the system is engineered to offer choices that already exclude what the majority of the public might want, like, say, a robust social safety net or universal health care.
That's a huge signal of structural exclusion. And the text digs into 3 specific institutional examples of how this is maintained. Let's start with the first one, finance.
Okay.
The analysis of systemic risk is, well, it's pretty revealing. The question is, why do massive financial institutions take on these ruinous levels of risk?
And the answer given is that they know the taxpayer must compensate for market failures. The risk gets socialized, the profits stay private.
And it's not just an assertion. The analysis brings in hard data for that claim, citing a key IMF study.
The IMF, right. Not exactly a radical source.
Not at all. And the IMF found that large bank profits were, and I'm quoting here, almost entirely explained by implicit state insurance and access to cheap credit.
Wow.
It basically exposes the free market ideology as a protective myth. The source material calls this system a conservative state nanny. It protects the elites while demanding austerity from everyone else. This is a feature, not a bug.
That's a huge finding. It shows how private finance relies on public subsidy. Okay, let's move to the second institution, labor.
The critique here highlights the systematic bypassing of labor norms, and it uses a very specific anecdote to make the point.
The one about President Obama visiting a Caterpillar plant.
Exactly. On the surface, it looks like a standard photo op, right? Supporting American industry.
But the context is everything.
It is. Caterpillar was cited as the first major industrial corporation of its generation to effectively break a powerful union using strikebreakers. This was a profound anti-worker strategy.
And by visiting that plant, the government is what? Effectively signaling institutional support for that union-breaking strategy.
That's the argument. It reinforces the idea that labor organizing is a threat to the preferred business model, regardless of any political rhetoric. It's an institutional signal that prioritizes capital over labor.
Okay. And the third institution?
Higher education. Here, the analysis focuses on the ideological push toward commercialization. The source material points to an attempt by a state government in Wisconsin to formally change the university's mission.
I remember this detail. They tried to remove the legal obligation to search for truth.
Yes, they tried to dismantle the foundational intellectual mission of the institution. And the implication is profound. By redefining the university's purpose to just serve the economy, the state shows a structural push toward purely market-driven institutions.
Prioritizing vocational training over independent critical thought.
Right. The very purpose of education itself is under regulatory attack.
So if these institutions are being structured to exclude popular will and prioritize business, then the narratives that support all this must be incredibly powerful.
They have to be.
This is where we need to separate the facts of, say, military action from the framing narratives they rely on. The source material seems to highlight 2 key insights about how U.S. power is applied.
Right. The first one focuses on what you could call the selection bias of military dominance. The argument is that if your biggest global advantage is overwhelming military force,
Then everything looks like a nail.
pretty much, your entire decision-making apparatus is conditioned to see every complex problem as something to be solved with a hammer. Force becomes the default, even if it's completely counterproductive.
And what are the documented second-order effects of that bias?
Well, that leads directly to the second key insight, the self-perpetuating cycle of conflict. The source material analyzes U.S. foreign policy actions, the Iraq invasion, the drone campaigns, Afghanistan, and it concludes that these actions have consistently stimulated terror, not suppressed it. When you remove state structures, when you have high civilian casualties, the resentment you generate creates a vacuum.
A vacuum that radical organizations like ISIS or al-Qaeda can then fill?
Precisely. The use of force creates the justification for the continued use of force.
But if these interventions are demonstrably creating more terror, how does the system maintain the domestic belief that they're working? What's the control mechanism that keeps the public passive?
That's the core of it. It all comes back to Edward Bernays and his idea of the engineering of consent.
The public is meant to be spectators, not participants.
Exactly. That passive role is crucial for what Chomsky calls the intellectual minority, to govern without any interference. The public should be present, but not actually participating.
And the most insidious propaganda achievement detailed in the material. It's the successful shifting of popular anger.
Yes. Think about all the anger from financial crises or stagnant wages. Logically, that anger should be directed at the masters of mankind, the corporate sector that's dictating policy.
But instead,
It gets redirected. It's pointed toward the government, the implementing mechanism, the bureaucracy.
which is so clever because it shields private power from any accountability.
It's more than clever. It's essential to the system. By framing government as the source of all problems, you encourage the public to dismantle the only tool they have left to regulate private corporate power.
And that brings us to the biggest structural signals in the source material, the systemic risks.
The existential ones.
Yeah. The analysis warns of the collapse of organized human society from two threats: nuclear war and environmental catastrophe. And this wasn't just theoretical. The doomsday clock was at 3 minutes to midnight during this period.
And for our analysis, what's crucial isn't just that these risks exist, it's that the political system actively chooses to normalize or even accelerate them. Let's start with climate risk.
The source material characterizes the political denial as being systemically embedded.
It does. The Republican Party during this period is called a radical insurgency. Its candidates either actively deny climate change or push for policies like expanding coal and fracking that just accelerate the disaster.
That's a pretty stark observation. The system in the world's most powerful state is optimizing for short-term profit over the survival of the species.
It's prioritizing profit over imperative. And you see a similar pattern with nuclear risk.
How so?
The threat is increasing. There's the U.S. modernization of its nuclear arsenal, a $1 trillion program, and rising tensions near Russia's borders. The source material even cites a U.S. Strategic Command, or STRATCOM, document.
And what does that document say?
It suggests that nuclear weapons must be constantly available as a shadow over any crisis. It normalizes their utility not just as a deterrent, but as an active coercive tool. It pushes the boundaries, making escalation more likely.
Okay, finally, let's talk about political risk. The rise of populist anger seems to be a huge theme in the later interviews.
It is. And the material argues that the shift toward what it calls predatory capitalism, basically neoliberal policies, since the 1970s, is the root cause.
Explain that connection.
Well, decades of increasing worker insecurity, stagnant wages, deregulation, rising inequality, all of that created the perfect environment for an angry, fearful, and often racialized base to emerge.
A base that supports populist candidates.
Exactly. The analysis posits that the rise of figures like Donald Trump isn't some strange aberration. It's a predictable second-order outcome of eroding democratic institutions and the decline of labor organizations. It's the political result of economic policy.
Okay, let's distill all of this. For you, the listener, if we ignore the politics and just focus on the mechanics of power, what are the structured signals this material sends about how the system works?
All right, here are the concise, actionable, system-level signals we can pull from this. First, the U.S. political market consistently prioritizes short-term financial and corporate interests over broad public demand. What this means for the system: public policy is optimized for capital accumulation, not popular mandates.
Signal 2, the redirection of accountability.
The core strategy of U.S. power elites involves redirecting popular resentment away from the corporate sector and onto government agencies. What this means for the system: the engineering of consent preserves private power by making public institutions the sole target of anti-establishment anger.
Third, the military selection bias.
Military dominance creates a strong selection bias, ensuring that diplomatic or peaceful alternatives are often ignored in favor of violent intervention. What this means for the system: the existing power structure guarantees the perpetuation of conflict as a primary tool of foreign policy.
The systemic risk framework.
The world is facing two unprecedented, accelerating, interlocking risks: climate and nuclear. Yet the political structure in the world's most powerful state is actively choosing to accelerate the worst outcomes. What this means for the system: existential risks are being treated as externalities to be ignored, rather than core imperatives for policy.
And the myth of the free market.
Financial sector profitability is highly dependent on implicit state insurance and subsidies, making the free market doctrine a protective myth for the rich. What this means for the system: the financial system relies on state-provided external stability while aggressively promoting deregulation.
And finally, the political fallout from economic inequality.
The surge in right-wing populism is a predictable, second-order consequence of neoliberal policies that increased worker insecurity and inequality over decades. What this means for the system: the failure to address class politics internally results in volatile anti-establishment movements externally.
So what does this all mean for you? Our deep dive reveals a tightly constructed system where economic incentives drive policy and narratives are actively engineered to keep the public passive, often by manufacturing resentment against the government itself. It's a system built not to serve public needs, but to resist popular mandates and shield the corporate architects of policy.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you to take away from this. The source material shows that the knowledge and the technical capacity for necessary, life-saving change already exist. I mean, efficient national health care, clean energy, disarmament plans, they're all technically feasible. However, the established institutional structure, what the source material calls the masters of mankind, actively blocks the application of this knowledge if it threatens their control or their profit imperative. So this raises a really important question. In the face of dual existential threats, nuclear war and climate catastrophe, is the current institutional system built fundamentally to pursue profit or to secure survival?